Let's turn to the government's reform roundtable that's coming up in just over 2 weeks. What are the proposals you're putting forward, particularly in the area of tax?
Well, one of the biggest issues in terms of living standards for younger people in Australia is the issue of housing affordability. It's like the number one issue, and we need to address it. Young people should have the same aspirations as the generations before them, and at the moment they don't. It's been wiped out by the fact that the housing prices have gone up twice the rate of wages over the last 25 years, twice the rate. Now, supply is part of that issue, and we've got proposals around that, but we also think that the tax system has to change too, because that has fuelled those housing prices and taken it out of reach for young people.
Now, so as far as I know, negative gearing was originally going to be in discussion. I'm pretty sure was it Bill Shorten went into when he went up against ScoMo in the election, and apparently a big reason why Labor lost was because they had this negative gearing discussion, and basically everyone said no. And then so Albo's always been very anti negative gearing, just based it's not the popular vote, and now it's sort of turning around again. I think the negative gearing is just because the more that the housing crisis stuff comes up, it's almost like it's almost inevitable from most people's perspectives. So let's just and then obviously the capital gains, for investors it kind of needs to be readdressed too.
You're talking about negative gearing and capital gains tax break.
So we're going to take a proposal that both negative gearing and capital gains tax should be reformed, that they should be limited to one investment property and grandfathered for the existing arrangements for 5 years to allow people to adjust.
So sorry, for 5 years you can
keep current arrangements.
But after that you can only have one negatively geared property?
Yes, and so you can have as many investment properties as you want, but in terms of the tax benefit, limit that to one. The issue isn't,
See, I actually kind of agree with that. I think if you have, let's just say that you have a property that you live in, and then you have an investment property, and then you can negative gear that as much as possible. And then when it comes to your second one, then that basically you don't get those benefits. And then maybe you get capital gains, different in capital gains as well. I actually kind of think that's actually good, instead of like just saying you can have none or maybe two, maybe one or two, maybe that's what they'll come back with. But like, because I think I had this discussion with someone where it is actually good to have investment properties. Because people don't want to own a property. Not everyone wants to own a house. They don't want to be in debt for 30 years and stuff like that. Or like they're backpackers, or they're here on visas and stuff like that. Like they don't want to own a home. Like it's you need to have renters out there, also investment properties out there. But I do think there is an issue with. I don't know if she'll touch on this, but there is, I think it's something like 20 or 30% of the properties owned in Australia are owned by like the top 1% of property investors. It's something like that. And I don't know how true it is, but if it is true, then that is probably how, I think that would be a good way of determining, or that's the sort of where you want to apply policies and regulations to basically try and, disperse that ownership out. I think that's a good approach.
Australians that are trying to get ahead and have an investment property, that's not the issue. The issue is that a small number of investors, and we're talking about 1% of investors, own 25% of the investment properties, and that has been driving or fueling the housing prices. And so so that's exactly what I was saying. So that's why, I think it's very bang on here. I think this is the sort of opinion I've had for a while now. You want to reward the people that have gone out, they've got their own home, or they could be renting, but then they get an investment property, and you want to reward them with negative gearing and stuff like that as tax incentives for actually getting ahead and trying to basically maybe make some extra buffer on top of their super. So together with investment property, your own home, and your super, putting all that together, that should take you out of retirement
very, very smoothly, and you should be very, very well off if you can do that. So you need to reward the people that basically stick to that plan. It's very, very good for the economy. But then when you start getting, people that have like 5+ investment properties, and then the way that they make a living is through investing in properties, I think that's when, especially when there is a housing crisis, I think this is a very, very good approach. And I think that this would probably get traction from, obviously not from the 1%ers, but everyone else. I think there will be. I think this has actually gone pretty well.
I don't think we ever intended even this to happen as a result of these tax measures, but this is where we're at. And unless we change it, working people can't live where they work. They can't live where they grew up. It is causing an enormous amount of pressure for people. And a really disturbing thing is that a study in New South Wales said that there will be no grandchildren in Sydney because people between the ages of 30 and 40 can't afford to live there.
What about capital gains tax? What's your proposal?
I agree with that.
Exactly the same, that capital gains tax and negative gearing.
So 5 years
as it is, and limited to one investment property.
And I like that rule too. I've given them 5 years because, if you've got 5 years to transition, or even just say it starts going out in percentages or something like that, I think that's a very good idea. It gives people enough time to sell what they need to sell and make another arrangement, move that money elsewhere. What else can they invest in? If you, instead of investing in the property, could you reinvest that money into businesses, startups, shares? You could actually boost the economy that way. These are very, very good talking points.
After the 5 year mark.
Yeah.
Now, of course, there's a long history of debate around both of these tax measures. Labor in 2019 under Bill Shorten took changes to, slightly different, but changes to negative gearing and capital gains tax.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about before,
and since then, Anthony Albanese, as leader, has said, well, that was the verdict of the Australian people. And he took that position at the election earlier this year as well. Would it be a broken promise for him to now shift on these issues?
Well, I just say that we've got to bite the bullet. Otherwise we're just saying, too bad, young people, you're not going to be able to ever own a home. Forget about even thinking about it. Since 2019, the problem's just got worse. It's going to continue to get worse. Yeah,
and I did this. If you look at another video I did just recently on Gen Z, one of their biggest concern is housing, and will they ever be able to get into the housing market? And I think all of this is actually touching on that point. So with the voters, with more Gen Z voters coming into the mix, I think these kind of policies and these kind of changes need to happen. So that's why I feel like negative gearing is going to, for Labor, is going to have to be at some point reintroduced.
Unless the government's brave enough to do something about it, we are just abandoning those generations, and we think that's fundamentally wrong.
Have you done any work, any modelling on the impact this would have on the rental market in particular? Because the criticism or the argument for not doing something, for not touching those rules, is that it would drive up rental prices and limit rental stock.
That's why we have to increase supply as well, and the government's already got a whole lot of measures with that, and we've got other proposals too. We think the government should get behind modular housing. It's quicker and it's faster and it's cheaper in terms of producing those houses. Also, the rules around superannuation funds investing in housing are too limiting, and that's holding back investment in housing as well. We'd also be open to sensible proposals around speeding up approvals. You've got to also increase the supply of housing alongside changing the tax measures.
But what would this raise in terms of tax revenue if these limits that you're talking about were put in place on negative gearing and capital gains?
We think around 1.5 billion a year. We think around that, maybe a bit more.
Okay, so you'd be talking, 6 billion or so over the forward estimates in tax saving for this. But it would obviously hurt those investors who are currently in the market after the 5 year mark. Is there any work done on what the impact would be for them?
Well, people will have time to adjust and to make decisions they want to. Part of the problem is that we've been keeping a whole lot of capital in housing, and it's not those people's fault. They've done that because it's worked for them and they've made smart decisions around that. But it's also meant that capital's not being invested in areas that are going to increase productivity, like Australian businesses and other ways it can be invested. At the moment, it's all been locked up in housing, and so that's another part of the productivity question.
The other tax measure that
so that's what I was saying. Yes, so all of that, absolutely in support of. There's a lot of money is invested into capital that could be used elsewhere to boost the Australian economy, especially in productivity, which is apparently the Treasurer's main point of focus. So there's a lot of area of what she's saying. Modular housing. I haven't looked too much if modular housing really is that suitable, but. they're obviously looking into it. I think looking into or doing some studies in terms of what will happen to rent prices if people start selling off, because obviously if more people start buying because there's more supply, then does that mean that there's not as many rental properties available? Like if one person, say, has 10 investment properties and they end up selling 9 because they don't get tax benefits, that's 9 houses that get bought by people who live in those houses. Then you basically just evicted 9 families from renting. What impact is that going to have, especially when it comes to like if they're in certain schools and certain zones and in terms of work? So that could drive, then you'll have less supply of rental properties, which will then drive up the price of rentals. So yeah, there is a bit of a trade-off there. But hey, rental prices are going up anyway, apparently.
Franking credits, is that something you're saying Labor should come back to now?
No, it's not one of the proposals we're putting forward, but we are putting forward other proposals. Working people in Australia pay, our tax, our fair share of tax. You and I, David, pay our fair share of tax. We want to see everyone pay their fair share, and at the moment, there's too many loopholes and too many ways that the very wealthy can get out of tax.
So what are you suggesting should happen there?
So quite a lot of measures here, because we've also got a problem in terms of really big, extremely profitable companies not paying tax as well. Go through the list of them, everyone from Netflix to News Corp, right through to Glencore, the insurance companies, all of those, very profitable, not paying tax. So we would say this, the tax measures that should be brought in is for family trusts. We think that there should be a minimum 25% paid on disbursements. So a minimum family trusts have become a way of people basically hiding their money and getting out of paying tax. We'd also say for millionaires or people, not millionaires, people who had an income of $1 million in a year should pay a minimum tax rate of 25%. We think that's more than reasonable given that your average worker pays more than that. At the moment, there's 91 people who had an income of that.
So this is really starting to tackle the intergenerational intergenerational wealth and the people that have quite a few zeros in their bank account, I dare say. So going after those billionaires and all that sort of stuff. So interesting.
Pay no tax at all, David, and that it's just not on. And also got a situation where the nurses of Australia pay more tax than the oil and gas companies, and so we'd also propose 25%.
Yeah, I was wondering when the oil and gas like Santos and Woodside and stuff like that going to get brought up. But yeah, like how much tax they pay through the PRRT. In comparison to some nurses and that, that is one area I might look into, but I feel like it is quite saturated. But it's hard to know how much they actually spend in terms of their capital to do the works. And when you live in a capitalist country, businesses do have the ability to dodge tax. That's how our system, it's a product of our system, and you can't just go and just blanket tax on everything and be like, no, now you have to pay tax, because that will impact investment. But there's a smart way to do it, I reckon, and probably just doing a blanket tax it sends a signal, but it might work.
On the revenue from gas exports in Australia.
Well, it brings us to what the Productivity Commission's put forward ahead of this roundtable just the other day in relation to company tax. And just to broadly explain it, it would lower the company tax rate from 30% to 20% for all businesses, all companies with a turnover under $1 billion, but then also introduce this 5% turnover tax on their cash flow for every business, large and small. So the biggest businesses would face a higher tax rate. It sounds like you're open to this idea.
The thing is, the big problem we've got is that Australia is dominated by a relatively small number of companies in a small number of industries, and they are very, very profitable. And they don't want to pay more tax. They yell and they scream every time it's any proposal, even though 31% of companies aren't paying any tax at the moment. And what they've been doing is prioritising short-term profits over investing in productivity, in capital or in research or in people. And so that's got to change. And the only way to change that, we think, is to make sure that whatever proposals come forward lead to investment in things like capital and research. And this proposal is something we will look at in more detail because it does do those things. And all the calls to cut company tax in the end will hurt ordinary people because that's money out of Medicare, money out of education.
But it's, the Productivity Commission makes the point that we need to lower that company tax rate to encourage investment, dynamism in the economy.
No, we don't.
Well, this is this is from the Productivity Commission's submission. At the moment, in yellow is where our company.
Okay, so the OECD statutory tax rate. So we are currently in the high, by the looks of it, current.
The tax rate is compared to the developed world. We've got one of the highest rates.
Okay, so we've got one of the highest rates, and then we're going to be dropping it. That's what they're proposing. Interesting.
Rates. If it's lowered to 20%, we get one of the lowest rates in the OECD. You accept that this is an important way to encourage investment?
See their island?
Yeah. Yeah, I think she's going to say something about tax havens around here. But I think the big issue comes when you just got these companies making massive amount of revenue, and then somehow they're just not profitable on paper. It's wild how it's just wild how it can, and I think that's what ticks off most people, especially when you got like nurses and stuff that are earning somewhere between like 100 and 150k depending on their experience and all that sort of stuff, and then they're paying like 40, 50, 60 grand of tax a year, maybe not 60, but 40, 50 grand of tax a year, and then you've got these massive companies paying little to no tax. It's like if you think like if a huge company is paying like close to zero tax and they've got 10 employees that they pay 150k, and they're paying like 50k each in tax, is 150 grand in tax. Maybe they employed 100 people. That's when you start looking at those sort of scale things. That's when the argument starts to make a bit more sense.
Ireland's basically a tax haven, and that doesn't benefit the people of Ireland. Doesn't benefit them at all. There's no evidence whatsoever that lower tax rates are going to lead to more investment. And why would it? At the moment, these companies have got very significant profits, and they're choosing not to invest. They're choosing not to put it into a better, capital, more machines, different, research, and all their people. What, we're going to give them more money and expect they're going to change their behaviour?
Just before we move on from tax, though, your priority is clearly coming back to where we started: negative gearing, capital gains tax, these housing tax reforms. Do you expect that this Albanese government would be bold enough to go back to something that's burnt Labor in the past?
Well, it's also the other tax measures we raised as well, so it's not just those. We want to see living standards rising, and they're not going to rise unless we address housing affordability. It's number one issue for working people. But it's eating into everything.
You know the people in this caucus and these ministers and this Prime Minister. Do you get the sense that they're going to be brave enough to do these measures?
Listen, we're going to go and argue it. We're going to advocate for it. In the end, I guess the government will make their decisions based on what they think is in the national interest. We would say it is in the national interest.
What if it's an agenda for the next term, beyond the next election?
Well, we'll just see it become more and more unaffordable over that period of time.
I want to ask you about
Hi, if this is your first time to my channel and you are enjoying my videos, please drop a like and subscribe, and it will help my channel grow.